Greetings folks, and welcome to this video on the basics of the recumbent tadpole tricycle. This is a compilation of 5 previously shot videos based on different types of recumbent trikes, different types of rear wheel sizes on recumbent trikes, different types of brakes on recumbent trikes, different types of seats on recumbent trikes, and the inherent dangers to riding a recumbent tricycle. Let's take a look. Recumbent trikes are definitely not all created equal. I'm not talking about quality, but rather the whole horses for courses thing. There are different types of trikes for different types of riding, with a good amount of crossover in usability, and quite a few trikes straddle the line across different categories. From touring to racing and everything in between, once you decide on what type of trike will best fit your riding needs, there's a trike for you. And unlike the chocolates in Forrest Gump's box, if you do a little research before buying, you'll know exactly what you're going to get. Taking a quick look across this assortment of tadpole trikes, you'll see a dramatic difference in everything from seat height and recline to ground clearance. So let's go through each one of these and discuss the differences. This is a vintage Ice T. The T is way over on the touring trike end of the spectrum, hence the T for touring designation. The T has a very upright seat, which makes getting in and out of the trike very easy. Let's look at the first of our getting in and out tests. As you can see, I had very little trouble sitting in and getting out of the trike. The T also has great ground clearance, with the bottom of the frame being around 6.5 inches from the ground. Being a touring trike, the T's upright seat allows for optimal scenery viewing with no strain on the neck. The comfortable mesh seat offers an extremely cushioned ride, maximizing comfort for those long days in the saddle. Being as upright as it is, the T suffers from an aerodynamic disadvantage when compared with more laid-back trikes, but the point of the T is not racing, but rather enjoying the ride at a leisurely pace. The T is no longer in production, but there are plenty of touring-type trikes being produced today by all the trike manufacturers, including trikes with full suspension if you're looking for an even more comfortable ride. This is a vintage Speed GTO, another trike maximized for touring, but as you can see, it's a bit sportier than the T, a little lower to the ground, and has a seat that's a bit more reclined. In our getting in and out test, the GTO is a little more of a challenge than the T, but it's still pretty easy to get in and out. The GTO again sports a mesh seat for comfort, and while its ground clearance isn't as good as the T, it still has lots of space between the ground and the steel cruciform frame. While the GTO puts the rider in a slightly more reclined position when compared to the T, which makes moving faster a bit easier, the GTO still falls over in the touring trike area of the spectrum. This is a vintage Ice Q26, 26 for the 26-inch wheel in the rear of the trike. The Q26 moves us firmly into the sportier end of the trike spectrum, and as you can see from our in and out test, I'm starting to plunk down in the seat on the way down, and it's taking a fair bit of effort to get back up out of the seat. This is, unfortunately, the price you have to pay for better aerodynamics. The Q26 was designed to be a fast trike, with the Q standing for quick, but I've never found it to be as fast as any of the trikes dedicated completely to speed, like the Catrike 700 or the Ice VTX. Instead, it shines as a crossover trike, a decently fast trike, and something that I would be perfectly comfortable touring with. The Q26 sports a hard shell seat, which for some may mean a loss in comfort, but which gives the rider a firmer platform to push against, making it easier to maintain higher speeds. Finally, we come to the Ice VTX, a trike with a large 700C rear wheel and with every aspect of the trike maximized for speed. As you can see in our final up and down test, I'm really plunking down hard in the seat here, and it's taking a hand against the seat and a good amount of effort to get out of the VTX's seat. Again, this is the price you pay for aerodynamics, but if you can deal with the price of entry, pun intended, the VTX will reward you with an extremely fast ride. Ground clearance on the VTX is also getting more limited, with around 3.5 inches of clearance. With a carbon fiber hardshell seat, there's a firm platform for transferring energy to the pedals, and with the rider down out of the wind, there's not a whole lot of wind resistance to slow you down. But being lower to the ground, you may find it more difficult to take in the view, and your neck will naturally be in a more craned position when compared to a touring model of trike. So you see, there's always a trade-off. The key is deciding what's most important to you and then finding a trike that's designed to perform best in those areas. You may find a pure touring trike suits your needs perfectly, or you may be looking to simply find the fastest trike out there. Or you may be best suited to one of the many trikes that fall somewhere in between those two extremes. Wherever you fit into the wonderful world of triking, whatever type of trike you decide on, I can guarantee you'll have a great time riding. So there are basically 3 different sizes of rear wheel being used currently on recumbent trikes. You have the 20-inch rear wheel, the 26-inch rear wheel, and the 700C rear wheel. Now, whenever this subject comes up on one of the online recumbent forums, it creates a rather vigorous debate about which is better, so I won't be declaring a winner here, mainly because I don't think there is one size that's best for everything, but I will be going over some of the pros and cons and perceived pros and cons of the different sizes. The first trike I owned was one of the first cat trike pockets. If you go back to the first video we ever posted on YouTube some 12 years ago, you'll see me riding around on that tiny red pocket looking like I strapped some wheels to my rear end and took off down the bike trail. The small size of that trike was partly due to the 20-inch rear wheel, which brings us to one of the 20-inch wheel's pros, and that's that it makes for a more transportable and more easily stored trike. A trike with a 20-inch rear wheel has a shorter wheelbase, so if you have a smaller car or limited room in your garage, this might be a reason for going with a 20-inch wheel. Another pro of the rear 20-inch wheel is that it makes for a trike with a great turning radius. When I moved from a trike with a 20-inch rear wheel to a trike with a 26-inch rear wheel, I found that sudden sharp, slow turns on, say, a bike path that were no problem with my cat trike pocket or my Speed GT3 just weren't possible on my Ice Q26. Once I was riding the ice with a larger 26-inch rear wheel, I found I was having to stop, unclip, push the trike back with my feet, and do a sort of three-point turnabout deal to get the trike around these types of corners. No big deal really, but a bit of a pain when you're used to not having to do it. Another advantage of having a 20-inch rear wheel is that it means you typically have 20-inch wheels all the way around, so you'll only have to carry one spare tube with you. So, did I notice any advantages when I moved to the 26-inch rear wheel? Well, I did notice that suddenly I had a lot more choices when it came to buying tires. Being a standard mountain bike wheel size, it's a lot easier to find a varied assortment of 26-inch tires when compared to 20-inch tires. Note, I've never had a hard time finding a 20-inch tire I was happy with, so again, this is really no big deal. If you're riding on roads that have lots of potholes, you'll likely have a better time with a larger rear wheel like a 26-inch or 700C, simply because the larger wheel is less likely to fall down into a pothole. For regular riding, have I personally noticed a difference between a 20-inch, 26-inch, and 700C rear wheel as far as smoothness of the ride goes? No, I personally haven't, and I'm guessing that tire air pressure, the model of tire, and the model of trike might realistically have more to do with this than the actual rear wheel size. One thing I have noticed with the Ice VTX, which runs a large 700C rear wheel, is that on sharp, high-speed turns, the rear wheel does seem to load and skip more than a 20-inch rear wheel or a 26-inch rear wheel. But again, as long as I know to expect this, I compensate by taking the turns more slowly, so it's not a critical thing. Some folks seem to think that a larger rear wheel will carry high speeds better. I haven't noticed this. My VTX is the fastest trike I've ridden, but I chalk that up more to the lightweight and aerodynamics of the trike rather than the size of the rear wheel. There is some logic to the fact that if you tend to ride at faster speeds in higher gears, a larger rear wheel will work better for you just because it's easier to run higher gears with a larger rear wheel. Finally, folks seem to endlessly argue about the look of a large rear wheel versus the look of a small rear wheel on a trike. There's obviously no right or wrong here. I've seen great looking trikes with both big and small rear wheels. Maybe I just like trikes so much, I think they all look great. This is a Sturmey Archer drum brake. An external arm, when activated by the brake lever, pushes internally housed brake pads together, stopping the wheel and the trike. Now the great thing about drum brakes is that the majority of the functional parts are stored in that rather large hub you're looking at. This tends to keep everything clean, and the design makes for an almost maintenance-free braking system that can go tens of thousands of miles before needing some kind of attention. In fact, the main positives of drum brakes are the lack of maintenance required and supposedly better aerodynamics. The negatives are that drum brakes can be a bit heavier than disc brakes, and they can also fade a bit on long, steep descents. We'll address that later. This is an Avid BB7 disc brake. They come in mechanical and hydraulic versions. This version happens to be mechanical. Disc brakes are lauded as the king of braking systems and are often sold as an upgrade both on trikes and on road bikes. When you pull the brake handle, the large rotor gets squeezed between two small brake pads, which slows the wheel and the trike. The big positive of disc brakes is that they are extremely good at, well, braking. They're also a bit lighter than drum brakes. The negatives of disc brakes are that they can be extremely finicky, often noisy, and if you do a lot of descending, you can eat through those little brake pads pretty quickly. I don't want to dig too deeply into the differences between hydraulic and mechanical disc brakes, as that isn't the focus of this video, but I've used both and found both to be just as effective at braking, and each has had its fair share of issues with noise and brake pad wear. Disc brakes are supposed to be a little bit less aerodynamic than drum brakes, but in this shot showing a frontal area of both, maybe there's a little more hub area showing on the disc brakes, but when you consider the tiny bit of extra weight you get with the drum brakes, I'm gonna call that a wash. So is one braking system better than the other? They're both great braking systems. If your goal is to ride while spending as little time as possible messing with your brakes, I'd opt for the drums. I did experience some fading while using drums on a Speed GT3, but this was only on some very extreme descending, and it's not like the brakes stopped working or anything. I could just feel that as they heated up, they were braking a little less effectively. As soon as I stopped descending and they cooled off, they were right back to normal. If you're looking for the absolute best possible braking, especially if you do a lot of descending and you're trying to keep your trike as light as possible, and you don't mind having to occasionally fiddle with brake adjustments and regularly change out brake pads, disc brakes are the brakes for you. Of course, everything I've stated here is just my opinion based on my experience, so if you've had different experiences with disc or drum brakes, let me know in the comment section below. Oh, and whether you use drum brakes or disc brakes, just be glad you're not using those horrible rim brakes. Just kidding, all my road bikes have rim brakes. Now get outside and ride! So there are basically two types of seats being used on recumbent trikes these days. You have the mesh seat, which is the most common of the two, and the hard shell seat, which tends to turn up on the more performance-oriented trikes. Is one really better than the other? Of course, the answer to that question depends on the preferences of the person riding the trike, their preferred riding styles, and their ultimate goals for their trike. Let's take a look at both types of seats and discuss some of the positives and negatives of each. Most trikes come equipped with a mesh seat. As the name suggests, a mesh seat is made from a durable mesh fabric, usually draped over a metal frame with either straps or bungee type cords in the rear holding the mesh in place. Due to the natural flexibility of the mesh, this type of seat will most likely be the most comfortable style of seat for the majority of trike riders. Another benefit of a mesh seat is that since you only have a mesh style fabric against your back, there's plenty of airflow back there, so you'll likely avoid any problems with a sweaty back, something that riders with hard shell seats know way too much about. Another benefit of mesh seats, they're relatively inexpensive to replace if they somehow get damaged. Hard shell seats can be made from carbon fiber or a poly resin, usually with some type of pad velcroed over the very hard seat material. Believe me, without some kind of a pad, hard shell seat would gain a new meaning altogether. Hard shell seats are basically recommended for folks with a need for speed. If you're really pouring it on, trying to milk every watt out of a pedal stroke, with a mesh seat, you may find that the slight amount of give in the seat results in a correspondingly slight loss in energy delivered to the pedals. Again, I emphasize slight, and while I haven't personally tested this theory, I'm guessing that the small amount of benefit gained in wattage transfer with a hard shell seat is extremely minor, especially after you get up to cruising speed. If any of you out there have actually done some kind of a wattage test with this, I'd love to hear about it. And of course, as I've already pointed out, while the mesh seat has great breathability, the hard shell seat, well, not so much. I do have a Ventasit pad on my Q26, which gets the breathability pretty close to mesh, but it still falls a bit short. The hard shell seat on my Ice VTX, however, while it has a very comfortable pad, has very little breathability, and on even slightly warm days, the pad and my back wind up sweat-soaked at the end of a long ride. You don't really notice it while you're riding, but if you stop and get out of the trike for a bit and then sit back down in it, well, that cold, sweaty seat against your cold, sweaty back can be quite an experience. After long rides, I actually sometimes get small puddles of sweat that I have to wipe out of the bottom of the seat. Hard shell seats usually come in different sizes to fit different body types, but that's also something to keep in mind about hard shell seats. If the shape of the seat doesn't agree with your body, there's not too much you can do about it. Come to think of it, I know folks who haven't been able to get along with certain hard shell seats and folks that have had problems with certain mesh seats. So if you possibly can, it would be highly advised to actually try sitting and riding in some of these seats to see which you personally find to be the most comfortable. So in my experience, is one of these seat types really more comfortable than the other? For me, it really depends on the amount of recline you prefer in your seat. Bottom line, while a hard shell seat can be extremely comfortable when very reclined, a hard shell seat that's set at a very upright position can be downright uncomfortable. Most hard shell seats don't have much real estate down near the bottom, and when set to a very upright position, you tend to slide down with most of your weight resting on a small hard bump at the bottom of the seat. I keep the seat on my VTX at around 25 degrees, which is pretty darn reclined, and it's one of the most comfortable seats I've ever experienced. But if I wanted to ride in a more upright position, a mesh seat would be, in my opinion at least, the more comfortable choice. And it goes without saying that everything I am saying here is just my personal opinion. Feel free to fill the comment section below with your own experiences and preferences vis-a-vis mesh versus hard shell seats. You really can't go too far wrong with either. Hey, as long as you're out riding a trike, how wrong can you go anyway? Okay, don't get me wrong. The Recumbent Tadpole Trike is one of the safest pedal-powered platforms out there. Still, there are some hazards specific to the Recumbent Trike. Some are more perceived dangers and some are very real dangers. Let's take a look. Ouch, leg suck. It sounds pretty nasty, and it can be. The problem is that if you're riding a recumbent trike with regular shoes and regular pedals, your feet can easily slip off the pedals and hit the ground. At this point, your leg could be dragged under the arm of the cruciform, causing a serious injury. The good news is that there's an easy way to prevent this. By using clip-in pedals and matching cleats as you see on these cycling shoes here, this disaster can be easily averted. What you're looking at is a close-up of one of my tires after I had experienced a dramatic rear wheel blowout. Now this particular blowout happened on a road bike, but I've read several accounts of blowouts on tadpole-style trikes that resulted in a complete loss of control. Something like this. The good news is that dramatic blowouts like that are exceedingly rare. In over 30 years of serious cycling, I've only personally experienced one blowout. Try to check the condition of your tires regularly, keeping an eye out for any large cuts or wear down to the casing. If you see serious wear or damage, replace the tire immediately. And keep in mind, a rear wheel blowout is not a guarantee of loss of control. I've also read accounts where the tire stayed on the rim and the trike was completely controllable. If you're wondering about front wheel blowouts, well, I had a front wheel blowout on my left front wheel going down a hill at 52 miles an hour, and I was able to bring the trike to a stop without any loss of control or any problem at all. A lot of people get a false sense of security on a recumbent trike, thinking that they can't fall over because they're not on a regular two-wheel bike. Well, believe me, you can fall over by rolling the trike. If you take a turn too hard and too fast without leaning, the trike will eventually go up on two wheels and then flip. This usually results in only minor injuries like road rash, but who needs road rash? So let me show you how to avoid this kind of thing. Watch here as I lean my body to the inside of the turn, countering the G-force that wants to flip the trike in the other direction. Learn the limits of your trike, lean on hard, fast turns, and you'll be fine. Now, I don't know whether to classify this as more of a perceived danger or a legitimate danger, but a lot of people are terrified of riding in the street next to cars. And you can see why. You're in a very small vehicle next to some very large, fast-moving vehicles with often inattentive drivers. The reality, as I've experienced it, is that for the most part, drivers are just freaked out when they see a trike on the side of the road. And I find that the drivers give me much more passing space when I'm on a trike than they ever would when I'm riding a road bike. Still, if you're going to be out riding amongst the cars, it's best to make yourself as visible as possible by using as many lights or flags as you feel are necessary. Hey, thanks for coming along in this adventure into the dangers of the recumbent trike. It's still a very safe platform, so get out there, have some fun, and as always, good riding. Thanks for hanging with us, folks, and we'll see you out on the road. Bye-bye.